Hi, my name is Bernard Pucha, and welcome back to CenterFrame Interviews, where we talk to fascinating filmmakers from all around the world. And joining me today is Kuwaiti filmmaker based in Doha, Maysaa Almumin. Thank you very much for coming and joining us on the show. You're also a member of the core community, which I really want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to have a chat with you.
Yeah, I mean, it was. We actually got introduced to you through Rana Kaskas and Susanna Mehani, who you've worked with quite a bit.
Absolutely. So we're all based here in Doha, and it's quite a small filmmaking community. So we kind of tend to seek each other out, and they're people that I've worked with and admired very, very much.
Awesome, awesome. I would like to talk to you about a really fascinating short film that you made, which I don't think I've quite seen anything like it. It's called Gele Kafar, and it's got a massive cockroach in it. And from what I could gather from the articles and interviews I read, is that this is based on a sort of French play on words. And
Right.
I would love to hear from you, like what the inspiration was for the film, and how sort of being based in Doha and being a Kuwaiti filmmaker sort of inspired that. So the choices you made in the movie.
Yeah, so J'ai le cafard is a French expression. It's a really, really old one, so not many people use it. It's one of the first expressions I learned when I was learning French as a young kid growing up in London.
Oh, you grew
So
up in London, that's right.
yeah, and then so I was in French class, and my teacher said this expression which fascinated me. Literally translated, it means "I have the cockroach," and an expression. It's an expression that means I have the blues or I feel depressed, and I was so fascinated by that imagery. And then decades later, as I went through life and experienced many things. One of them having been, moments of depression, and then I thought back to that expression, and I thought that imagery is so apt. Because it's there's a lot of self-loathing, there's lots of wanting to hide away, and I remember asking my French teacher, like, why the cockroach, and she said because it likes to hide away in little spaces and wants to be alone and likes the dark, and I thought that just felt like so descriptive of everything that I was feeling. And then years later, it's kind of like this short film was almost it was semi-autobiographical.
Right.
I was working in such offices, thinking and feeling so unfulfilled, feeling, run down, uninspired, just unable to connect with anything. And actually, I saw a little cockroach in the toilet that I used to hide away in, and this cockroach just wouldn't die. I,
Oh my
I
God.
didn't have the heart to clear it away. It was kind of hidden behind the toilet. I didn't have the heart to. I'm sorry, but from my region, we're quite cruel. You see a dying cockroach, you smack it, you know, you get rid of it. And then, but I didn't have the heart to do it. And I felt this kind of, apathy, this sympathy, apathy towards this dying cockroach. And I thought, you and me both, buddy, on our backs, wriggling away, just like struggling. And it took almost a week to die, and I thought, how is it that no one's cleaning it away? What are the cleaners doing? And I was just like, well, that's my little buddy, and I would go and check on it. So and then I just realized that at the time when I was not feeling so great about myself, that I had no idea, no recognition of what I was going through. In our culture, you feel low, you have a glass of water and say a prayer and hope for the best, and it's like and so there's this kind of lack of recognition of mental wellness, and so when years later I felt myself almost confronting the same situation, at least this time I recognized it, and that's when became inspired to kind of make this film. So
I mean, I have to say, there are two things that I really admire a lot about the film, and one is, first of all, that you actually had an enormous cockroach. I mean, this is not just like this. It is I mean, room
Yeah,
sized. I mean,
it's
it
like
is.
it's my height. I kind of made it my height. So,
It's
and I
incredible.
made that cockroach myself.
Did
So
you really?
I'm very
That's
proud of that. I mean,
that
I'm an
is
architect and designer,
yeah.
and so in terms of the visuals, the look and feel, and the design of the film, I get quite involved in that process, along with my production designers and my art directors, who I work with some amazing people in Egypt, Ahmed Saaduddin, Mohammed Fakhrani, and but the cockroach was going to be my baby. I knew exactly how I wanted it to look. I did not want to use CGI. I wanted it to be absolutely present in the, and quite real and slightly absurd. And yes, there are moments where you kind of recognize that it's a puppet, and other moments it's like it's made in quite a hyper realistic way. So the light catches and you're like, no, it is a puppet. No, it could be a real thing. And it's like, I kind of wanted that kind of quasi theatrical aspect of the puppet. So yes, I made the puppet really large, and I was in Doha and I had a studio at the university where I teach in. So I was making that and getting some students to help me put it together, and then ship the damn thing to Cairo. And that was quite funny, trying to get it out of customs in
Of
Cairo.
course. I mean, trying to explain to customs what it is.
Exactly. Like, how do I explain what it is? And,
I can
at
only
what
imagine that conversation. Jesus.
Yeah, and they've got all sorts of regulations, and that in Egypt they have to monitor the fact that certain artifacts could be smuggled out and smuggled in. So it's like you say the word, and my Arabic wasn't very precise. So instead of puppet, I didn't know what the word for puppet was. So I said sculpture, and they're like, "Oh, sculpture! We need the Ministry of Art and Antiquities to come over and check this out." And I was like, "No, no, no! It's just a thing. It's just something I'd like to have, and it's in the shape of an insect." And they're like, "Whoa, insects! We need the Ministry of
Oh my
Environment
god.
to come and check this out." And so there was like a lot of
Oh
confusion.
my
It took
god.
about 3 days to try to take it out of customs. And I was like, I have to film to shoot. So I need this out now. So that was
My
fun.
gosh. Yeah, I mean, but I mean, that adds a whole nother layer. But I mean, the other thing that I admired so much about your film was that you managed to strike this really interesting tone, which is horrifying, but also funny and uncomfortable. And it's a really like I really was like when the first time I watched it, and I've watched it 3 times since then, but the the first time I watched it, I couldn't help but like be mortified but laugh at the same time, And I was like, what is this? Is so this is it's almost absurd. Like but you feel really you feel so much longing for both the cockroach and the woman, but then you also are horrified by what you're watching, and oh my, I have to like huge respect from a directing point of view, huge respect for pulling that off, because that's not an easy thing to do. That sort of unease is really well
I'm
achieved.
glad. Yeah, I'm glad that you had that reaction, because that was kind of the intent. And I was trying to be very careful not to push it too much into kind of like a horrific disgust, like this disgust. And I wanted it to be a little bit of loathing, but a little bit of yeah, an affinity with this repulsive insect. And I think, that's kind of like how the main character feels. But for me, the cockroach was not only her companion, but also kind of partly a self-reflection of how she saw herself. As in, there's, yeah, I kind of loathe myself a little bit right now, but I'm okay. I'm okay with that. And she was okay with living with this cockroach. And I wanted to be very careful in both the editing, because you kind of edit it and you go, oh gosh, this is going completely in the wrong direction, and then you kind of bring it back. And then so we did that in many ways, with the sound design, with the music, with the editing, and just like like the sounds that we gave the cockroach, they were almost like squeaky, kissy noises. This, it's just like this little. So even though this giant thing was, massive and horrific, it had this kind of very squeaky insect.
Yeah. What made you choose Egypt to shoot your film?
Yeah, well, I was visiting Egypt. Oh gosh, I think I was visiting Egypt more than I was visiting Kuwait, actually. I was going there for a lot of work trips. There was a few reasons. So the crew that I used to work with in Doha had moved to Cairo. And when you build up that kind of professional rapport, for me, kind of like having a really great team on set where it's almost telepathy the way that we work with each other. It's like we know what the other person wants. So my DOP had moved to Cairo. The locations manager I'd worked with before had moved to Cairo. So it was like, if my crew is going to Cairo, I'm going to bring the film to Cairo. And actually, I wrote the film while I was in Cairo, on one of my many visits. And then I thought, I'd shot films in Kuwait before, I'd shot films in Italy before, and I'm really hungry to expand my knowledge in terms of like, how do people do things elsewhere?
Yeah.
I started filmmaking much later on in life in comparison to my other filmmaker peers. So I was very hungry to kind of get the knowledge I can, as much as I can, as quickly as I can. So to shoot in Cairo was like a huge opportunity for me. It has the oldest cinema industry in the region. It's more than 100 years old, and the crew there are just top notch. I mean, like the production designer whipped up sets for me in 2 days. I couldn't believe it. It was great, and I was really eager to experience all of that. And I must say that I had the question many times posed to me, like, why didn't you set it in Kuwait? Why didn't you, and for me, it was, how do you know the film isn't set in Kuwait? And that's when I play up in the script, actually. For me, it's almost like this film is set in a collage between Kuwait and Cairo. The names of the companies, the names of the restaurants, the names of, little areas that the other characters who do speak mention actually in Kuwait. And my main character never speaks. So I say to them, well, how do you know she's not Kuwaiti?
Yeah.
And actually I'm an extra in the back. So there's a Kuwaiti person in the back. And, when I worked in that company that I speak of, when I was in Kuwait, we were kind of a pan-Arab community that was working there. So the film is actually a closer representation of the reality of working in the private sector in Kuwait than the quote unquote Kuwait that I would have presented,
Right.
Full of Kuwaiti employees. You just don't get that. We're multi pan-Arab community in this region. So so
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, I think the emphasis on identity is such a strong thing nowadays. Like you have to represent your identity and stuff like
yeah.
that. And of course, I'm Austrian myself, but no, when I speak English to people, nobody would think I'm Austrian because my accent is straight American. But my German is super Austrian. I mean, to any German speaker, it's super unambiguous. But I think I couldn't represent Austria very well because I've lived so long outside of Austria, and even if I did represent, like, I wouldn't be making a movie about Austrian culture. Like, I'd be telling individual character stories, and I'm not always sure why identity always has to play into every single story. That's not the point. To my mind, when I watched the film, identity was never even a question in your film.
Yeah.
That's not the question the film poses, and that's not the question a lot of films pose. If identity is posed, then yeah, okay, you should be authentic, and it's really important that happens, etc.
I agree. I agree. It is a very tricky one. Especially like yourself, I have a multicultural background. I grew up in London. I'm married to a man from Finland. My children grew up in Qatar. My we have family in Kuwait and Luxembourg and Spain and Finland, and and it's just like, I speak a lot with my girls about identity, and it's like, we have we have, I don't think it's a unique experience where you experience many cultures, and wherever you go, how to, um you kind of know how to situate yourself and kind of be respectful of that culture. But in terms of an identity, it's like, sometimes I say an identity is not something that I have, but it's something that is perceived of me.
That's
So,
just a really good
you
point.
know, so it's
That's a
like,
really good point.
it's like, do you see yourself as an Arab? And I was just like, yes. Do you see yourself as a Westerner? And I was like, well, I lived there. Do you see yourself as Finnish? And I'm like, well, I know that culture. And it's like, yeah. So,
It's not an
um,
easy question to answer, and it's not.
it's not.
I find it so. I find it so interesting how important it's become to try and represent identity, and that somehow, actually, interesting enough, this conversation has become so strongly that only if you're from a certain identity are you allowed to represent that identity, and that makes people with multiple cultural identities, puts them in real conflict, because I'm like, well, okay, where am I
Yeah.
allowed to now?
What am
Like,
I
are you
allowed to
giving me
do?
permission?
Yes.
Like, how does this work?
Absolutely. I totally respect, cultures kind of owning, um, like, or certain groups owning their culture and wanting to represent it. And I think that's so important. And I think it's important to do it authentically. And, I, I wouldn't be able to speak about a culture that I'm not from, and I'm not going to pretend to. But like you said, when you're a little bit more malleable, that that there are a certain group like myself, and I see my children, and it's just, trying to navigate what that means. And that's why I kind of, even though my second film, And I Was Left Behind, for me was, quite a raw experience, where I was talking about something so unique to Maysaa, that grew up in a certain culture, is speaking back in her language, remembering a childhood memory, and but from a Maysaa that's far away from that. Um, and but yeah, it's just like, I've chosen to start writing stories about very human experiences that are shared. And so, yes, the film is an Arabic one, but it has a French title, and you can, and an Arabic title, and it's set in a pan-Arab spot. But it's interesting because the Latin American countries, South American countries, have connected quite well. This film has done very well in, South America and Latin speaking, uh, countries, and in their festivals. And
Nice.
you know, there you
Because
go.
depression is
It's
a
like,
human issue. Like, depression is not a cultural issue. Like, certainly the causes of it can vary depending on the cultures, but how you go through it is human. Like, this is not specific. This is specifically our people's problem, not
yeah,
a cultural problem. And I think that I think that what's interesting is, that the phrase comes from a particular cultural, um, old French cultural thing,
right,
but what it represents is entirely human, entirely universal. And I think
absolutely.
that's where most of these things come from. I think our experiences are far more shared than they are different. And I do think that what's important is that whenever you do, tell a story, is that even if you're not, like, for example, like, I've never had to suffer depression, but I feel I would feel comfortable enough to tell a story about it. I don't know
Yeah.
if I'd have to go through depression to be able to talk about it. Especially if I've had experiences with people that have had depression.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then but these are things you can learn. These are things you can experience.
I agree.
But then on the other hand, whenever you do that, you can't represent it in an ignorant fashion. You can't just say, well, we'll put it this way, like if you think of, I recently watched Ben-Hur again, right? And Ben-Hur is clearly a product of its time. This is
Yeah.
Hollywood's perspective on the Middle East.
Yes.
And at the time, of course, not a single American had been to the Middle East if they weren't in the oil business. And
Yeah.
and I think and of course that film represents Arab Bedouins, but they're played by British actors with brown face.
Yes.
The obviously Jesus being a regional Semitic Jew would have been not the long-haired Caucasian ethnicity that the film represents, or let alone Charlton Heston, who is as white as they come, playing
Yeah.
both Moses and Ben-Hur in very Middle Eastern stories and looking nothing like the parts, right? So I obviously this is a Hollywood perspective, and it is a relatively ignorant one,
Yeah.
But yes, so when you represent a culture, you shouldn't be ignorant of the culture you're trying to represent. But I do think that if you can respect and represent a culture honestly and respectfully and truthfully as much as you can, I guess, however you can do that in a story, then you should be able to, I think,
I think so. And it's not that it's funny because I've had, I'm saying all of this, but at the same time, I do constantly say that I am writing 2 more scripts right now, and I am very adamant to represent the middle-aged Arab woman, which I find myself to be right now, because I find our stories aren't being
well, right, what you know, right?
Yeah, but I want to do it not from I don't want to succumb to this post-colonial gaze, if you will.
Yeah.
Like,
that's a great expression. I like that.
Yeah,
It's true.
all respect to kind of like this, I don't know, there's kind of like the expected representation of what an Arab woman should be. And it's like watching Ben-Hur, because I grew up going, should I be that? But that's not, and I kind of take it on as in like, yeah, that's how it should be represented, Bedouins in the desert. Sure, you've got Bedouins in the desert, but hey, we're living in, come see my home.
I see IKEA shelves,
Yeah, there you go. It's just like, it's like an IKEA showroom, but with some really wonderful Kuwaiti artists.
I love that, Emma. I think that's great. You're going to have to
my
tell
mother
me.
Kindiri, my friend, shout out to her, amazing Kuwaiti artist, and a bestie, and love her work. I do feel that I represent the Arab woman, but it's in the way that you're probably not expecting to see her, as a woman in a corporate office who's dealing with depression, as someone who's trying to remember something her grandmother told her and she feels like she's far away from home, as like my next film, which is going to be about a 70-year-old Arab woman who lives in Finland as an immigrant, and she would like to get to know her. Well, she'd like to have more friends, but she wants to ignore her Finnish neighbor. Those kind of stories. And just something that moves away from your average stereotype. I don't want to succumb to a very limited view of what our stories as Arab women should be.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating that global cinema is really sort of finding a global audience, which is really nice, and it's not just all superhero movies or anything like that. But a common problem I see with world cinema is that the regional industries tend to struggle quite a bit. That you always find these massive centers, these massive production centers like Cairo, like London, like Los Angeles, like Rio, like they all have these sort of production centers in where a lot of the work is, and then smaller countries or anything like that, a lot of the filmmakers find themselves migrating to other places. And then before we started the interview, you mentioned Kuwait and how tricky it is to make films there. And I would love to sort of hear from more from you. So what the sort of the common struggles are to try and make films, like and what you're hoping to maybe get out of or improving in Kuwait.
Yeah, it is very tricky. Okay, so I haven't lived in Kuwait in a really, really long time, but obviously I have close connections and I travel there and I visit quite a bit. Now, the film industry, I would say, kind of, we started up quite strong, I would say, in the 70s with films like Bas Ya Bahar and Asamt. And then that kind of went silent and we went into more TV and soap operas, and they're very good at creating those. But when it comes to independent film, we don't have kind of proper funding institutes or supportive institutes. There's, though I was very pleasantly surprised to know that there is a university at the moment that has just opened and that has a course in filmmaking. So I'm looking forward to seeing kind of the industry grow there with with new filmmakers. There have been very few films made in Kuwait, and honestly, it's just
Are you
I'm
hoping
curious
for
to
more?
know how.
Are you hoping for more institutional support, like coming out of Kuwait or even in Doha, where it's where
Yeah,
you
I
are?
mean, in Doha, it's great. I've received all my funding in the past from the Doha Film Institute, from AFAP, which is amazing because it supports all Arab filmmakers around the world, and that's
That's
fantastic.
brilliant.
And a little bit from the university that I work in. But it's and that there's very specific and very few Arab institutes that give out that kind of funding. And filmmaking is expensive. Sure, you can make zero budget films, but it's like it's going to take you longer. It's hard to create something that's a little bit more structured, and yeah, I know filmmakers that have taken 4 years to make a short film, and then you kind of think that, I don't know, there is a growing interest, but I think it's still a huge struggle. Now, also, when it comes to women filmmakers, there's there's a new generation of women filmmakers coming out of the region because you've got a university, I think it's called Effort in Saudi Arabia. We have Northwestern here in Doha that have
I know Rana.
yeah, with Rana Kazkaz, you've
Yeah,
got film courses, and so there's a growing interest. I think Kuwait hopefully will catch up with that. But when you think about, I'm almost 50, so I can't think of anyone from Kuwait of my generation that's a filmmaker. And I only just started filmmaking. What was it, around 6 years ago, I think, 4 years ago, seriously, but 6 years ago. And so in this industry, you rely on, accumulating a tribe, finding your crew. So, and that takes a while, and it takes, yeah, it takes a lot of effort. And that is why, we mentioned Susanna Mirghani before the interview. So, and Rana Kaskas, these are amazing women of my generation. They're a bit younger, actually, but it's very important, to have your little network so that you can support each other and learn from each other. The pandemic did us the world of good, because we were stuck at home, and it was like a huge research process for us in terms of how to how do we make films now? We're stuck with limited crew, and we became like a really wonderful support network for each other. So yeah, I mean, I would say that having large institutes and kind of very, very sporadic places is both great, but it becomes very limiting. So it would be nice to see a little bit more grassroots companies or producers rising, because I do think that there's going to be a growing. This industry will grow soon enough.
Fantastic. Okay, well, last question. You come from architecture, which
Yes.
is an expensive art form. Now, now you're making film, which is
Because
an expensive art form. Um, do you? Is there anything like I've always found my fallback as a? I've always found like both sculpture and cooking to be sort of my fallback artistic stimuli, because I can only be on set so many times. I can only
Yeah.
do this art so many times because of the amount of money involved. It takes a while to get these projects off the ground. What is your day-to-day artistic
Yeah.
thing that you do that'll keep the creative juices flowing?
All right. Well, I am extremely lucky and fortunate to work as an assistant professor in Virginia Commonwealth University of the Arts Qatar, VCU Arts Qatar here in Doha. So I teach art and design at art foundation level, and my thinking tends to percolate a little bit into my projects and studios that I give to the students. For example, I just did a project with a colleague. Shout out to Nathan Davis, where we co-teach together, and we just made our students create. My colleague sees it as a sculpture. I see it as a set, and we're replicating spaces within, using cardboard within spaces. So we do sets, we do performance, we do performative photography. So in my day job, creativity is an integral part of that, and we make all the time, and we teach how to make, and we make ourselves, and then outside of university, and like when I'm not writing or editing or filming, then I work with Thomas Modine on Architects Independent, which is an interdisciplinary design company, and we design everything from micro scale wearable jewelry artifacts. We call them artifacts, not jewelry. Just the fact that they go on bits of your body makes it jewelry, but they're artifacts to kind of, we call them projects of the heart. So those kind of things kind of keep us going.
That's fantastic. It was great to hear that, because obviously a lot of filmmakers have day jobs in order to facilitate the time between movies, because it's such an unpredictable process to get, especially feature films, to get them off the ground.
Yes.
So it's good to hear that you have this, that you actually get to use your fellow students and these other projects as sort of as a creative driver as you go. That's really awesome. I like hearing that. Thank you very, very much for joining me. Do you have any projects you want to say that you're developing that you'd like people to get in touch with you about?
Yeah, well, I am happy to say that I'm working with Napa Films. They're a production company in Finland on a new short film that I want to shoot hopefully sometime next year. It's called Tango and Matchboos. It is a story which mashes up the two cultures I'm from, Kuwait and Finland, from my husband. So it's set there. I mentioned earlier, it's about an old Arab woman who is an immigrant living in Finland, and she gets to know her Finnish neighbor under unfortunate circumstances. And then I'm also developing a feature film, currently titled Good Grief, about a middle-aged Arab woman who finds herself single and, well, she was never married. She finds love. She seeks love, and she finds it in unexpected places. So
Right. Okay, great.
That's going to be a long. It's still early, but that's the script that I'm developing right now.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, Maysaa. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I loved hearing your stories about identity and representing Arab women in stories. I think it was a really fascinating conversation, and I hope to speak with you again soon.
Thank you very much, Bernard. That was great to talk to you.
And thank you for tuning in. I really, really appreciate you guys watching. Please be sure to check out other episodes. We mentioned Rana Kaskas and the Susanna Mehani, who was part of the UK Film Festival, and also many other filmmakers. Please go to our blog on CenterFrame.com, where we have all the CenterFrame interview episodes. But also, we have a brand new show called Make It Short, where people submit their short films to us and they get constructive feedback for the films they've worked on from professional filmmakers. And actually, we had Petros Silvestros, who's a close friend of CenterFrame, but also David Friedman, who's a well-established animation director, give really, really good and helpful feedback to filmmakers who basically want to show their films to us and learn more about their craft. So great. Thank you again for tuning in, and be sure to sign up to our social medias and to our newsletter on centerframe.com, and I will see you next time.